It wasn't a bad game that ended this coach's run. It was a confession. The moment he admitted he only thrives when everything stays the same, the decision was already made. In the NFL, chaos isn't an obstacle, it's the baseline. And once that truth became impossible to ignore, the illusion holding the Cleveland Browns together finally cracked. Behind closed doors, patience had been thinning long before the headlines caught up. Andrew Berry didn't need another Sunday collapse to see where this was heading. He saw a system that only worked under perfect conditions, a coach who explained failures instead of correcting them, and a rookie quarterback being asked to survive instead of develop. That's not a rebuild, that's negligence. What made this moment feel different was who was caught in the middle. Shedeur Sanders wasn't spiraling, he wasn't shrinking. If anything, he was growing faster than the structure around him could handle. While the protection unraveled, he adjusted. While explanations piled up, he got quieter and more focused. That contrast didn't go unnoticed upstairs. This wasn't about one blown assignment or one ugly press conference. According to reports, it became about something much deeper: trust. Trust that the people responsible for protecting the most important position in football actually knew how to adapt when things went wrong. And once that trust disappeared, ownership stepped in. Jimmy Haslam wasn't interested in waiting for another public unraveling. He wasn't willing to gamble a franchise quarterback's future on a coach stuck explaining why yesterday worked better than today. The Browns weren't just irritated, they were done pretending this was fixable with more patience. Because protecting a young quarterback doesn't start with praise or practice clips. It starts with a system built for disorder, pressure, and constant adjustment. And when that system doesn't exist, no amount of excuses can save the people responsible for it. For a while, the resume looked solid on the surface. At Stanford, the offensive line ran smoothly, assignments were clean, and the unit rarely faced true instability. Same quarterback, familiar personnel, controlled environment. It worked, and that success followed him to the league like proof he had it figured out. But the NFL isn't a controlled environment. It's designed to test what happens when everything breaks at once. Once injuries hit and the depth chart started shuffling, the cracks showed fast. Protection schemes stopped adjusting, communication lagged. The system didn't bend, it stalled. What had once looked polished suddenly felt fragile, like it needed everything to go right just to survive a single drive. And when things didn't go right, which is every Sunday in this league, there was no safety net underneath it. According to people around the situation, the problem wasn't effort, the problem was rigidity. The approach was built on continuity instead of adaptability. When the same faces weren't lining up each week, assignments became guesses instead of reactions. That's not bad luck, that's a system with no second setting. The most alarming part wasn't what showed up on tape, it was what came out in explanations. Instead of owning missed adjustments or simplified protection calls, the focus drifted towards circumstances, timing, familiarity, comfort. Subtle tells that the success people pointed to from his past only existed when variables stayed neatly in line.
In college, that kind of structure can carry you for years. In the NFL, it exposes you. Because the league doesn't ask whether your system works when it's comfortable, it asks whether it survives when it isn't. And the more the Browns faced real adversity, the clearer it became that what looked like competence was actually dependency, a coaching approach that didn't elevate chaos, but collapsed under it. And once that realization set in, the next question became unavoidable. If the system can't adapt, who ends up paying the price for it? The moment everything snapped into focus came during a press conference that was supposed to calm things down. Instead, it did the opposite. When asked about the repeated breakdowns up front, the explanation didn't center on missed reads or protection adjustments. It centered on cadence. Different quarterbacks, different timing. Too much change, too much noise. That, according to him, was the root of it all. Inside the building, that answer landed like a warning siren. Cadence isn't an anomaly in the NFL. It's the norm. Quarterbacks rotate, injuries happen, game plans shift on the fly. A unit that can't function because of a voice change under center isn't unlucky. It's unprepared. And the more that explanation was repeated, the worse it sounded. What made it sting was how detached it felt from what everyone else was seeing. This wasn't about timing on the snap. This was defenders breaking through untouched. This was a quarterback getting hit on 3-step drops. No cadence issue explains that. That's communication failure. That's simplified protections not being called. That's a line that doesn't recognize pressure until it's already home. According to reports, the explanation didn't just frustrate fans, it hit ownership differently. To them, it sounded like someone explaining why things used to work instead of how they were going to fix what wasn't. And when a coach leans on reasons instead of solutions, it tells everyone above him that the playbook has run out. The doubling down made it worse. Instead of backing away from the comment, he leaned into it again. Timing, familiarity, consistency, almost as if repeating the words might turn them into answers. But each repetition did the opposite. It made clear that there was no counterpunch waiting, no adjustment coming, just a justification loop. In a league where adaptability keeps you employed, that was the turning point. The cadence excuse didn't just explain the protection problems, it exposed the mindset behind them. And once that mindset was revealed, there was no walking it back. While all of that noise was spilling into microphones, Shedeur Sanders was moving in the opposite direction. No excuses, no subtle shots, no public frustration. Instead, he went quieter, sharper, more deliberate. The kind of shift you see when a young quarterback realizes waiting for help isn't an option. According to people around the team, Sanders didn't check out when the protection failed him. He checked in deeper. Extra film, longer conversations with the center, more ownership of pre-snap responsibilities that most rookies aren't even trusted with yet. He started recognizing pressures faster, changing protections on the fly, and asking questions that
Went beyond the original game plan, not because he wanted control, but because he needed answers. What stood out was how natural the growth looked. Sanders wasn't trying to play hero ball every snap. He wasn't forcing throws to compensate for chaos. He was processing quicker, adjusting his internal clock, and learning how to survive without losing his edge. That's not panic, that's evolution. And it was happening in real time, under constant pressure. The contrast became impossible to ignore. Here was a rookie quarterback absorbing hits, making adjustments, and still showing week-to-week improvement. Meanwhile, the unit tasked with protecting him looked stuck, explaining why it couldn't adjust. The gap wasn't just physical, it was philosophical. Sanders didn't call anyone out. He didn't need to. Those close to the locker room say his communication became more direct, more assertive, not emotional, intentional. He wanted clarity, he wanted solutions, and most importantly, he wanted a structure that matched the league he was playing in, not the one being referenced in interviews. That's what made this stretch so revealing. The quarterback everyone expected to struggle was growing into the role faster than the system around him could support. And once that reality set in, the pressure upstairs wasn't just about fixing protection anymore. It was about not wasting what was developing right in front of them. By the time the frustration became visible on Sundays, the decision-making had already shifted during the week. Publicly, nothing changed. Internally, everything did. Andrew Berry wasn't weighing one game or one quote. According to reports, he was tracking a pattern that had become impossible to defend. Missed blocks were one thing, they happen. Injuries piling up were another, that's expected. What couldn't be rationalized anymore was the lack of progress. Same issues, same breakdowns, same post-game explanations that went in circles without landing on responsibility. When a unit fails the same way every week, it stops being execution, it becomes identity. Inside the building, trust erodes quietly. No press release, no dramatic confrontation, just fewer nods in meetings and more unanswered questions. Could this staff fix what was broken? Did they even recognize the real problem? When those answers stay vague for too long, confidence disappears fast.
That's where Jimmy Haslam came in. Ownership didn't need to micromanage tape sessions to see what was unfolding. A quarterback they believed in was absorbing unnecessary damage, and the explanations for why it kept happening weren't getting stronger. They were getting thinner. What made it a deal-breaker wasn't just the on-field result, it was the deflection. According to insiders, the sense grew that the coach didn't actually have a fix, he had reasons. And in the NFL, reasons don't protect quarterbacks, plans do. This wasn't framed as a single misstep or a bad stretch of luck. It was viewed as a season-long failure to adapt, to lead, and to own outcomes. And once that conclusion settled in, the pressure upstairs wasn't just about fixing protection anymore. It was about not wasting what was developing right in front of them. Relationship changed. Meetings shifted from problem-solving to risk assessment. Not how to improve the line, but how much longer they could afford to let it stay this way. By then, the trust wasn't damaged. It was gone. And without trust, the next move wasn't emotional, it was inevitable. The timing caught people off guard, but inside the building, it made sense. The decision didn't come after the Bills game, it came because of it. With Buffalo looming, the Browns weren't just preparing for an opponent, they were staring down another potential public unraveling. According to sources, the warning signs showed up before kickoff ever became a factor. Practice reps were sloppy, walkthroughs felt uncertain, blocking assignments were still getting missed even without full speed. When pressure looks confusing in shorts, it becomes dangerous under lights. That reality wasn't lost on the front office. Buffalo's pass rush wasn't a mystery. Everyone knew what was coming, and yet nothing about the preparation suggested the unit was ready for it. The same communication issues, the same hesitation, the same feeling that adjustments existed on paper but not in instinct. At that point, waiting wasn't patience, it was exposure. Ownership didn't want another 60 minutes of explanations layered on top of hits absorbed by a rookie quarterback. They didn't want to hear the same post-game language dressed up with new phrasing. Jimmy Haslam wasn't willing to risk his most important investment becoming a weekly talking point on national television. So the move happened quietly and decisively. No reassignment, no temporary title shuffle. The plug was pulled before the damage could repeat itself. From the outside, it looked abrupt. From the inside, it felt overdue. The message was sharp and unmistakable. This wasn't about punishing failure, it was about preventing more of it. And by acting before the Bills game rather than after, the Browns made one thing clear: excuses were no longer acceptable cover for unpreparedness. What mattered now wasn't optics or continuity, it was stopping the bleeding. And sometimes in the NFL, the only way to do that is to move before the next hit lands. No one inside the building expected an overnight transformation. That was never the point. What they needed was something far more basic: stability, clarity, a sign that the unraveling wasn't inevitable anymore. And almost immediately, there was a shift you could feel. The offensive line wasn't suddenly dominant, but it was present. Communication looked sharper. Assignments were cleaner. The pocket didn't collapse the instant pressure showed. For the first time in weeks, Shedeur Sanders had just enough room to operate without bracing for contact on every drop. That alone changed everything. Plays had rhythm again. Not explosive, not flashy, just functional. The run game found creases that hadn't existed. In pass protection, breakdowns still happened, but they weren't immediate or constant. Sanders could set his feet, he could scan, he could trust the timing of a throw instead of throwing purely on instinct. That difference showed up in his demeanor. He wasn't playing survival football anymore. His eyes stayed downfield. His movements were controlled instead of rushed. Even when pressure arrived, it felt delayed rather than inevitable. That's not something you can fake. It comes from believing you have a chance. The tape didn't scream dominance, but it whispered competence. And for a unit that had been collapsing weekly, that was massive. The offense didn't look scattered. It didn't fold after the first blitz. When mistakes happened, they didn't snowball into entire drives being derailed. It became clear this wasn't coincidence. Sometimes the most impactful adjustment isn't a new scheme or a personnel swap. It's removing the one voice holding the group back.
Without that weight, players simplified their communication and trusted their rules. The game slowed down. For the first time in a long while, the Browns' offense showed proof of life. Not a cure, not a finished product, but evidence that the bleeding could stop. And once that happened, the conversation upstairs changed completely. The firing wasn't the solution, it was the signal. Everything that followed made it clear this move was never about putting out one fire. It was about redesigning the foundation that allowed fires to spread in the first place. Behind the scenes, Andrew Berry had already shifted focus from weekly damage control to long-term structure. According to reports, draft boards were being reworked in real time. Trench players climbed. Versatility mattered more. Intelligence mattered more. The goal wasn't just to add bodies, it was to build a line that could survive chaos without collapsing. That meant targeting linemen who could move, communicate, and adjust without needing perfect conditions. Players who recognized stunts, passed off pressure naturally. It didn't freeze when things deviated from the script. The Browns weren't chasing highlight clips, they were hunting dependability under stress. Coaching became just as important as personnel. The profile shifted: adaptability over pedigree, accountability over familiarity. Whoever came next would be expected to develop depth, not complain when it was needed. Injuries wouldn't be an excuse. Rotation wouldn't be a disruption. It would be part of the plan. Ownership was aligned. Jimmy Haslam wasn't interested in patchwork fixes or short-term optics. Protecting Shedeur Sanders wasn't just a weekly objective anymore. It was the organizing principle of the franchise. This wasn't about blowing up the offense or starting over. It was about removing weak points that couldn't hold up under pressure. Every decision moving forward filtered through one question: does this help the quarterback develop, or does it expose him? The plan wasn't loud. It didn't come with leaks or slogans, but it was deliberate. And for the first time since the protection began unraveling, the Browns weren't reacting anymore. They were building towards something that could actually last.
The hard truth is this: this was never about patience running out. It was about clarity finally setting in. The Browns didn't move on because of one bad stretch or one uncomfortable quote. They moved on because the gap between what the franchise needed and what it was getting became undeniable. The mistake wasn't believing in Shedeur Sanders. That belief was validated every week. He absorbed pressure, adapted on the fly, and kept developing despite the chaos. The mistake was assuming a system built on comfort could survive a league designed to remove it. Protection isn't a luxury in the NFL. It's the baseline for everything else to work. When it fails, play calling shrinks, confidence erodes, development stalls. The Browns watched that cycle unfold in real time and chose not to let it define the next phase of their rebuild. This change wasn't loud and it wasn't dramatic. It was necessary, and it sent a message far beyond one position group. Accountability isn't optional anymore. Adaptability isn't a bonus trait. It's the standard. What happens next will say more than what just happened. Draft rooms are shifting, coaching expectations are tightening, and the grace period that often surrounds rookie quarterbacks is ending early, not because Sanders hasn't earned it, but because he has. The league doesn't wait for teams to figure things out. It exposes them until they do. The Browns learned that lesson the hard way. Now the only question left is whether they'll finish the job or fall back into the same patterns they just worked so hard to escape.